Today, I'm delighted to welcome back to the Digital HR Leaders podcast, Cole Nussbaumer Knaflic, the CEO and founder of Storytelling with Data. Welcome back to the show, Cole.
Hi,
I think
Ted.
last time you were on, we did the interview in person in London in those halcyon days before the pandemic.
It
I think
seems like forever ago, doesn't it?
it does. It's just over 4 years. I
Yeah.
think it's February 2020. So I think you were in town because you were doing a workshop.
Yeah, that was one of my last trips
Mm.
pre-pandemic.
It's lots happened since then, isn't it? Cole,
Indeed.
Cole, for those who are listening who maybe didn't listen to the episode 4 years ago, could you share a little bit about yourself with our audience?
Absolutely. So my background is math and business, and I've always been fascinated in the space where those two things intersect. So my career started off in banking. I spent time at Google on the people analytics team, and always spent a lot of time with data. And not only working with data, but helping other people understand the work that I had done with data. And it was relatively early on that I got interested in visualizing data and graphing it as a way to help more people understand the complicated things that we were doing behind the scenes. When I was at Google, I had an opportunity to build out a course on how to do this. So teaching other people how to make graphs. And then over time, I spread my wings beyond Google and started traveling and going into different companies and teaching people how to take the data that they understood and help make it accessible to others and help people not only understand the information, but what to do with it, how to act, how to make smarter decisions or have better discussions in light of what the data tells us. And so I started my company, Storytelling with Data. It's been more than a decade ago now, and it grew out of the training that I did while at Google, along with the realization that increasingly everyone is being asked to use data in their day-to-day work. And people aren't naturally skilled at knowing how to do this, knowing how to look at it and analyze it, but also even when they do know that, how to then talk about it with someone else in a way that makes sense and engages and drives towards better decisions and actions. And so my company, Storytelling with Data, we spend most of our time teaching people how to do exactly that, where we'll go into an organization, spend half a day or a day with a group teaching both the ins and outs of how do you make a good graph that makes sense to someone else, but also how do you go beyond the graph and really think about the thing that you're trying to achieve. How do you build a story around that and use it to get your audience's attention and build your credibility and drive them to action? So we do that through the workshops, the books, the blog, the podcast, our online community, all of the things that go with that are really trying to help everybody out there who needs to get their point across to somebody else, whether it's with data or more generally, share the tips that we've learned over time through trial and error and research, and basically help people be better communicators.
Yeah, that's really good. And actually, obviously, Storytelling with Data as a company, you've grown quite significantly, I think, since we last recorded an episode in 2020. And maybe you're out. I remember reading some research last year, I think it was from Click, that they'd done a survey of senior leaders in different companies. And the conclusion that one of the conclusions they drew was that being data literate will be as important by 2030 as it will be the ability to use a computer.
Sure.
So that kind of gives us an indication of how important data literacy is, and obviously storytelling and being able to put a graph together and interpret insights are all part of that.
Absolutely.
Cole, in our last interview, we discussed how you can create compelling stories with data. And again, to those of you listening who haven't, I do highly recommend listening to Cole's guidance around that. Since then, we've seen significant technological advancements in AI. I mean, you may have heard about something called generative AI. There wasn't that much noise about it last year. What are your thoughts on how AI can help enhance storytelling with data skills?
Such an interesting question, David. And I think where AI is really exciting is in how quickly it's going to enable us to analyze data and analyze great amounts of data, right? It historically has taken an expert who has years in statistical methods training to do this. And so I think the power is really exciting. Where it becomes a little scary is maybe when you have people instructing the AI who don't have that grounding in the statistics, the math, the asking the right questions and kind of poking holes in the right places. And so I think those skills are still going to be very important. That knowledge is still going to be very important. It's just going to be directed differently. I think a lot of it will end up being directed at guiding AI to do smart things and knowing when to question or when to kind of poke in order to ensure that things are robust. Because it's almost like the junior statistician going out where they haven't fallen into the pitfalls yet to know of, oh, if I throw every variable at the model, it's going to look really good, but I've got all these confounding factors that are actually meaning it's going to break very quickly. And so having people who know what they're doing to be able to, I think, train the AI and do those pieces will still be important. But the skill that I really don't see AI helping us with, and it's a skill that I think is critical now and becomes even more so as we think 5-10 years out in the future, is this ability to engage with another human being, to bring in the context that's useful and an understanding of the business environment and the nomenclature, and put all of these pieces of the puzzle together in a way that helps, whatever the output of the generative AI is, to help it make sense and be meaningful. And as we have more tools to help us with this, it's those like foundational pieces, I think, that we really need to double down on so that they don't get missed. Because otherwise, we're going to end up in a space where we have a lot of different takeaways or directions we could go and not the right translator to help us make meaning out of it. And so this is where it's the same skills that, have been needed to talk about technical work or about data and graphs that become even more important, I think, as we look forward.
Yeah, I agree with you. And I think actually, the promise of generative AI, I guess, is it's going to democratize access to data to more people, and those people are going to have to be using it more in their day-to-day work, which means the skill to interpret it and tell stories around it and to connect it to the business is going to be even more important. But as you said, you need that backup from people who do understand the maths, who do understand the statistics to almost validate it. So it's going to be a slightly different ecosystem than maybe what we've been used to.
Well, and it doesn't solve the problem, if you will, right? The democratization of data, I don't know if that's the people see that as the fix, maybe, but it's a fix to a different problem than we typically have. I liken it to, when dashboarding tools were first coming out and becoming popular, everybody thought, oh, I'll just invest in dashboards and that's going to solve the problems. When really the problems oftentimes are more about the culture at the organization, the fact that the engineers and the salespeople don't talk to each other, or it's all of these other things that the tool is a band-aid that fixes maybe a piece of the challenge in getting the data, but it doesn't fix the problem. And again, this is where people who know the context and can navigate these intricacies are going to be the ones that can help harness the power of tools like that. In the same way that's when dashboards work well, it's because you have people making them work well.
And I guess that knowing how to communicate data is one part of the equation.
Yeah.
But we both know that to be able to do this, you need to be able to talk and connect with your audience to communicate what
Absolutely.
matters to them. And you've recently published your third book on this. There we are. Storytelling with, for the people watching the video version, storytelling with you, plan, create, and deliver a stellar presentation. Could you share in your own words a little bit about what the book's about and who it's designed to help?
Absolutely. In more than a decade of, well, even more than that, right, of creating graphs and then teaching others to create graphs, I came to realize over time that still something was missing. Somebody can make the most beautiful graph or slide, and if they can't subsequently talk through that information in a way that engages their audience, piques their interest in some way, gets them to want to listen, the beautiful graph is going to fail. And yet we've all seen the flip side of that, where someone might get on stage to present and have mediocre slides, but if they can connect and build rapport and there's evident passion, that still works. And so over time, it became so clear to me the role that the individual plays when communicating. And I think of my own path. I didn't start out a strong communicator. I'm an introvert. My degree is in mathematics. I like to be in a room by myself behind my computer. That is my natural environment. But I knew that if I stayed there, I wasn't going to be able to have nearly the impact that I wanted to. And so I used my teaching. I really approached it in the same way that I did graphing, where it was every time I put something in front of someone, I use it as a trial and error to understand what works and what doesn't, and do more of the things that work and fewer of the things that don't. And when you're presenting, you get this beautiful real-time feedback in the eyes and the faces and the body language of the people to whom you're presenting. So when you are attuned to that, you can understand in the moment how things are going and adjust or try different things and understand, when I walk to this part of the room, what impact does that have on whether that person pays attention to me or engages in the conversation. And so I started playing with my delivery and really building a good understanding of what works and how do I use my body language and my hands and my voice to draw people in and get them to want to pay attention to what I want them to pay attention to. And so I taught myself this over time, or learned this over time. As we started growing the Storytelling with Data team, I recognized I can teach this to others, my teammates who are now delivering workshops around the world as well. And then it struck me sort of the same way that it did with the graphs. If I can figure out how to do this and I can teach other people how to do it in small ways, anybody can learn these skills. And so with the Yellow Book, Storytelling with You, it's really about trying to speed up that process for others so that you don't have to go through quite as much trial and error. But what are the things you can do when it comes to planning and getting really clear on your audience and your message and the pieces that will ultimately help you be stronger when it comes to communicating those things to others? And so the book really walks the reader through the robust process, from low-tech planning to creating actual slides of graphs and words and images to that presentation piece. But it turns out everything you do along the way, even when it's creating your material or planning your material, all of that, when it's done thoughtfully, can help you be better at presenting ultimately as well. And then there's, of course, some really concrete things that you can do when it comes to honing delivery and practicing in a way to refine and build, I think, both confidence and credibility to be able to use some of these tactics. So it's really a comprehensive workshop in a book, if you will, of how to not only create excellent content, but how do you make that content shine in terms of how you talk through it, how you engage with the people with whom you're communicating? And so it really goes beyond just storytelling with data. You can apply everything to when you're communicating with data, but it's really more about communicating generally effectively, which we all do every day. And yet, rarely do we give a lot of thought to the intricacies of that. And it turns out that you can be really strategic in how you communicate.
Yeah, and certainly for listeners that are interested in this, I definitely recommend the book. It's really practical, and it's a step by step guide. And as we were talking about, there's lots of great visualization in there. Very practical guidance, I think. So thanks, Cole. I think it's for writing the book, because I think it's something that's really going to help the field, not just in HR, but in other fields as well. One of the things you talked about there was audience, and obviously let's dig into that a little bit, because understanding your audience is so important if you want to deliver a presentation that will speak directly to them. So what are some of the strategies that you can recommend to listeners to better understand their audience and tailor their presentations to ensure the message not only resonates but prompts action? Because you can have the best insights in the world. You've got to prompt action. That's what you're trying to do with this, isn't it?
Yes. So with audience, the first step is identifying who they are. I think oftentimes we cast too broad of a net when it comes to that of, I'm going to communicate to anyone who might be interested in my project. And you may communicate to all of those people, but you will serve yourself well by getting really specific on who your audience is in a given situation. Ideally, if you can get that down to a single person or a small group of people, it allows you to get really specific in terms of their needs. So when you think about it, we can tailor basically everything we do for the audience, from when do we meet with them, where do we meet with them, how do we do it, right? Is it virtual, or are we in the room with them? Are we presenting on a screen, or are we physically flipping through paper together talking about things? So when you think about it, we could tailor every part of how we communicate for our audience. I think a lot of people, either they say, oh, my audience is broad, or they say, you know what, I don't really know my audience, and just throw their hands in the air and then go ahead and create the presentation that's for themselves or for their data or for their project, which is so short-sighted. Because the more we can do to understand our audience, and not just who they are, but really what do they value? What makes them different from you? Because understanding those nuances and then being able to not only craft how you do things in order to make that a comfortable experience for your audience, but also be able to adjust on the fly if you need to, so that you can be gathering more information about your audience even as you're presenting to them. For example, if I'm going to the board and, say there's a couple new members who I haven't worked with before, I can go in, I need to know my stuff, which means I probably need to have a pretty thorough presentation ready. But rather than start by jumping into there, I can get a sense of the room and I can ask people what they want. And I have this big deck, we can go through it. Would you rather I start with the 30-second, here's what you have to know, or do we want to dive into the details? You can understand some of these things in the moment, even if you can't ahead of time. Now, of course, even better if you can ahead of time. And you can understand nuances of your audience in a lot of different ways if you just pause to give yourself time to do so. So I can think about other people who have communicated with them successfully. What could I learn from that? Yeah. I can get a sense of what level of detail will they be interested in. Are they going to require data, or do they abhor data? And if so, how does that mean I approach things? It's sort of limitless, the amount you can tailor. And the more important the situation, the more time you want to take to do so. And while this sounds generous, ultimately it's self-serving, right? Because the more you do this, the easier time you're going to have communicating to this person or these people, and the better your odds are for success. And so you mentioned not only communicating, but driving towards action. This is one place where I see people often stop short, where we know the data, we've done the analysis or the project, and we have an idea of where we think things should go, but we bite our tongues and we don't say it because we want the audience to come up with it, or they'll be more invested if it's their idea. Right? These things are true, but when you communicate and you don't go to that next step, it can leave your audience feeling like something is missing, where they then send you back with more questions or more data to chase after, and the conversation isn't as fruitful as it could be if you were to recommend something, even if it's the wrong thing, because it gets people focused on talking about the right sorts of things. And when we're communicating with data, or even without data, communicating a project, the action is never about the data. And so if you find yourself being sent away from a meeting to chase after more data, something failed there. The data isn't what's going to answer the question. It, again, is what the person brings to it. It's marrying the data with the context, with the business environment, with the people, to be able to say, here's what we should do now with this new understanding, or here are some things to consider, or here are what other people have done successfully in similar situations. Anything you can do to get the conversation focused back on the, what does this mean we do differently, or how does this confirm how we operate, or help us have better conversations and decisions about how we could do things. And I think that's when you're communicating well, when things are being understood, that's the difference that you can see that is tangible, is the conversation shifts to being not about data or a graph or a slide, but about the business and about what we could do differently or better. And it's those conversations that are ultimately what we want to be driving.
Yeah, driving action, isn't it? Be clear on what you want people to do, clear on the recommendations, clear on the actions, maybe talking about what happens if we do nothing. And then I guess sometimes, depending on the audience, again, here's a couple of options on what we can do and what might happen if we do this. I mean, that's the clarity I think you're talking about, isn't it? It's not just presenting the data. This is the problem that we were investigating. This is why it's a problem. This is what we found. And as you said, a lot of the time, people then think the next bit is the hard bit. Is how do we take that into the now what?
Yes.
I guess part of it. So really interesting. And one of the things I love about the book, though, and I'm going to pull this out because it came with it, is your step-by-step guide in three categories around plan, create, and deliver. And I think there's 12 steps in total there for people that are again watching the video. So a step-by-step guide to structuring a presentation, along with tips on presenting your data with words, with graphs, with images. That will resonate with your unique audience. Now, I know in our previous conversation, in other conversations we've had around storytelling with data, we dug deep into this topic, but just for a recap, and particularly thinking of maybe some of the HR and people analytics professionals that are listening to this, who've maybe got a presentation to deliver in the next week or so. What are some of the key principles to follow when presenting to key stakeholders, or maybe even to the board?
Number one would be being clear on the point you want to make, both for the entire presentation and then for any given slide or with a graph. I'm a big proponent of, if you're going to communicate something, put it into words. Don't let the first time you say those words be in front of your ultimate audience. Say them earlier than that. And anytime you're going to show a graph, form a sentence about that graph. It helps you get clear, and it sounds really simple, but it helps you get really clear and specific on the purpose of including it. And by putting it into words, we take away that level of abstraction of, oh, I'm including data because people like data. No, I'm including data because this point tells us X, which is going to change how we do Y, or it's going to counter the biases that I know people have in this space or the way that we've done things in the past. So being clear on your point and making sure that you put words to that point through not only how you title a slide, but how you verbalize that information as well.
And as we talked to, it's not just about the visualization. It's the art is in the delivery, and as you said,
Yes.
using words and maybe labeling the slide, labeling the graph with the exact point that you're trying to make as well, reinforcing that, as you say, take some of that ambiguity away.
Yeah, and make it clear where you want people to look. Right? So you can use contrast visually in the materials you create. I know we spent a lot of time talking about that, I'm sure, in our last conversation of if you have somewhere you want people to look, make it different. Use color there. So make it clear both where you want people to look and what you want them to see by putting it into words. That will serve any content well. But I think in general, considering the content you create, right, whether it's slides or graphs, these are your useful assistant. They should not be the center of the show, if you will. When you're presenting, you, the presenter, should be the focus. And then that gives you a lot more flexibility because your slides are going to be static once you've built them, but you can still be dynamic and react in the moment and do things differently to help make sure that it's a positive experience both for you and for your audience.
I've been fortunate to see you speak a number of times, Cole, particularly at People Analytics World events in London, I think, and also in Amsterdam last year, and at some of the workshops that you've delivered as well. And what strikes me is you always manage to leave your audience inspired. What's your secret, or perhaps I should say secrets, to doing that? What can people listening learn from you? Because you said that this wasn't something that you took to naturally necessarily. It's something that you've learned and got better and better at as the years have gone on.
I can remember, and there's a story actually in the introduction of the book, being the shaking leaf when I would need to talk in front of other people. I didn't breathe deeply enough, so my voice would shake, my hands would shake. I would be visibly nervous and could hear that I was visibly nervous, which then perpetuates and makes the whole situation worse. Fast forward to today, and even just listening to you talk about London and Amsterdam, I'm smiling because I love being on stage, which is not ever anything I would have anticipated when I think back to Shaking Leaf Cole. And it's not so much of a secret. The thing that did it, and the thing that I think can do that for anyone, is passion. It's being truly engaged and excited by what it is you're going to share. Because if you are, that energy is contagious and can play out in really useful ways, which we can talk more about. But I think the converse of that is really important, which is if you can't find your own genuine interest in what you're communicating, there is no way you're going to be able to get other people interested in it. And so you've got to find that nugget, that thing that makes the thing that you're going to talk about thrilling, right, to you. And not everything will be thrilling, but that has the interest in it. Because when you can do that, then that's going to come across to others in ways that can be really useful. And then I think beyond that, it's being thoughtful about how you use the tools at your disposal when you are communicating. Right? So when you think about slide or a graph, you can use contrast, you can use animation, you can do these things. There are things you can do with yourself as well. How you move, right? How you use your body language, your hands, your voice is a hugely powerful thing that I think we don't give nearly enough credit to, both in terms of volume, right? If I'm going to make a good point, I can get loud. Or if I want to shift things in the room, get people to tune in, I can get quiet and have people perk up. I can speed up as I get excited and bring people along with me as I make a big point. I can pause to bring emphasis to something. And these things feel very uncomfortable if you've not been playing with them. And so I'm always a big advocate of test things out in low risk spaces first, right? In casual conversations, in team meetings, before you go to your next board meeting and play with your voice, for example. But once you start doing it, then you get to witness the magic of when things work and when it's done well. And when I say I love standing on stage, it's because of that superpower that you can get when I know that I can engage an audience because I'm going to go up there, I'm going to smile, I'm going to have fantastic body language with my shoulders back, and it's going to make me look confident and feel confident. I'm going to use my voice and my hands and bring people along with me. And everyone can do that. Everyone can roll pieces of that sort of like performance, if you will, but in a good way, right? Not in a showy way. You can roll that into how you communicate in a way that's authentic to you. And so another tip I'll often give people is the next time you find yourself talking about something that you're really passionate about, right? It could be sports or religion or politics. Notice what you do. Take note of your body language and your voice and your facial expressions, and take the best parts of that and think about how you can roll that into how you communicate in other scenarios as well. And recording yourself and watching and listening it back are extremely powerful and ruthless sort of exercises to hone skills, because you will see and hear yourself doing things that you want to correct. And it becomes a much easier way to do so when you become personally aware of, oh, I do this thing that I thought was okay, but it's really annoying when I see it or when I hear it. And so doing some of these things that I think makes a lot of people uncomfortable, but it's productive discomfort. And that's a lot of it. And going back to, you talk about me being on stage, when I seem comfortable there, it puts the audience at ease. And that's one of the things that we can think about when we're communicating in any situation. That how do we project comfort on the outside, even if we're not feeling it on the inside, because that's going to make for a better communication process for everyone involved.
Yeah, and you're right. So important. I mean, you talked about the passion. I mean, if you're not passionate about what you're talking about, how can you expect people listening to pay attention and be passionate?
Yeah, you can't.
It's yeah. So I mean, particularly last year at People Analytics World, your presentation was all about critiquing good things about people delivery style and bad things. So it's even more important, I guess, then that you're passionate about, but also prepared for it and confident yourself. Because if you're saying one of the worst things you can do in a presentation is not to appear to be confident, you've got to appear to be confident yourself when you're delivering that, but not overconfident, of course.
Yes.
So it's kind of a balance, isn't it?
Yeah. And body language is so important with that, because for confidence, you need to have enough breath to be able to breathe deeply and use your voice powerfully. And so standing or sitting straight, having your shoulders back, right? You think about like where your lungs are. You need to have room for those to expand so that you can do these things. And actually a fun exercise is to just do the opposite of that. If you kind of roll into yourself, right? I'll do it. I roll into myself. I slump my shoulders, my head's down. Notice how my voice changes, right? Even in a podcast where you don't see it, versus I sit straight. I have my shoulders back. I'll use my hands. I'll smile. You can hear the difference in my voice when I'm
Mm.
smiling. That is absurd and so powerful. And so that's where I think there is something to the fake it until you make it sort of piece, where even if you're not feeling the confidence, if you can do some of these things to your body that mimics
Mm.
what confidence would look like, you can start to internalize it as well. You almost trick yourself in ways that can be useful for anyone who gets nerves when it comes to presenting. Another trick for if you find that you have nerves ahead of presenting at a meeting or on stage is I'm never a fan of memorizing, because that can go wrong. If you forget the word or the phrase, then you're lost. But I am a fan of committing things to memory. And one of the most important things to commit to memory are just your first few minutes, how you're going to start.
Mm.
And I will
Mm.
talk through this aloud multiple times ahead of time. I'll often take walks around my neighborhood and I'm talking out loud to myself. And again, not to memorize, but if I know there are 5 points I want to hit in my introduction and I can talk through those in a few different ways, what I'm doing is expanding the number of pathways in my head that I know I can use to get from point A to B to C to D to E, and have
Mm.
ways to navigate that. And by committing that to memory and practicing aloud a few times in a few different ways, now when I get to the important thing, when I have those first few minutes of nerves, that's enough to get me through it eloquently. And
Mm.
then, by then you've been going for a couple minutes, and so your nerves will have abated, and now you can think on your feet as you need to. So there are a lot of things that you can do for planning how you're going to present that will make that a more comfortable experience and a more successful experience because of that. And that's really what I try to pack the book with, are just tips on things like that anyone can roll into, whether it's the formal presenting from stage or just, a normal important business meeting where you need to show up as your best.
Yeah, I'm really glad you said that about the first 5 minutes or 5 points, because that's what I do. It's like I know that if I've prepared and passionate about the topic, usually feel that I know enough about the topic to justify being either on stage or in a meeting. Usually on stage with me, but I guess it's a similar ethic whether you're presenting to a small group. And it's like, what are the first 3 things? What are the first 3 things I'm going to say? And I'll go through those in my head. And even if it's like a big presentation and I'm a bit nervous, once I've landed those 3 things, as you said, you're into your flow, and you've got the confidence that you've gained by getting through those first 3 things, and that
Yes.
helps
Yes.
everything, really, your delivery and everything, and then it seems to flow very well. The other thing you said, I hate listening back to episodes of the podcast because I hate hearing my own voice. But you're right. If you don't do that, how can you improve? And you think, okay, that bit was done well, that bit wasn't done well. And what I always try and do is, although I'm not doing it at the moment, is try and think that the guest should be 80%, 90% of the conversation, and I should be a lot less because I'm the guest and the host, and people want to hear the guest. So it's just, and sometimes I think, okay, I've talked too much there. Actually, I think that now. So I'm going to go on to the next question, Carl. Now, in terms of delivery, your delivery will be different whether you're presenting to a large audience, maybe you're presenting to an external audience. I know some of the people listening to this probably get on stage at conferences like People Analytics World. Whether you're presenting to your team, maybe a group of your peers, maybe the HR leadership team, or maybe the board, or maybe an all hands, and also whether you're doing it in person or maybe you're doing it virtually as well. And increasingly we're going to be doing that. We're going to be presenting to some people that are face to face, some people that are virtual. What are your tips about when you're presenting to an audience that are both face to face and virtual?
Oh, that's the hardest. So I'll preface by saying when you can do those things separately. So when you can be in person with people who are in person and separate from that virtually, I am a fan of breaking that up because then you can really target how you do things for the given setting. I think when you can't do that, when you have people who are both in person and virtual, it can be useful to have a second person with you when that makes sense. Particularly if you are in a room with the people who are together in person, because then you can have your second person be focused on the virtual pieces and actually lend a voice to the people who are virtual when that makes sense. One of the things I really enjoy about virtual is it gives people other ways to participate. Right? So I talked about being an introvert. What we find in our workshops is we get participation from introverts in totally different ways because of the chat feature. But when you have people also in the room, it can be hard to keep an eye on chat at the same time. So having a second person who can help manage that can be a useful thing. I also think when you are presenting and you have people together in person and virtually, your voice becomes even more important of a tool. Because for those who are watching virtually, you've been flattened, you've been reduced in size. And so you don't have the same power when it comes to expression and body movements and those sorts of things. But you can make up for that with how you use your voice in terms of keeping people engaged and listening, staying away from any sort of monotone bits that are going to invite people to tune out. Also, the way that you optimize your content might change if you have people virtually. I'm a big fan, particularly when showing graphs, but this can work with any sort of more dense information that you need to show, which is rather than put everything in front of your audience at once, build up to it. So with a graph, I might start with the axes and talk through what those are, and then layer on data and build the graph as I'm talking through it. For those who are tuning in virtually, the email inbox is only ever a click away. So this fear of missing out can cause people to keep their attention on you and on your materials, which can be a useful thing. But I think stepping back from the specifics, just thinking critically about what success looks like in the given scenario. It could be that the important stakeholder is in the room with you, which means you probably don't have to optimize as much for the folks who are joining virtually. In the case where that's opposite, then you'll change how you do things, but being really clear on what success looks like and then trying to set yourself up so that that comes to fruition.
No, some really, really good advice there. And we're going to go to about feedback, and we're going to talk about what you're doing next. And then I'm going to ask you one other question related to the 12 steps before we do the question of the series. So firstly, feedback. Sure. So we can obviously we can record ourselves, we can listen to ourselves, but what are some of the other best ways to seek and utilize feedback for continuous improvement in your presentation skills?
I think giving someone else a heads up before you want the feedback and being specific on what you want the feedback on. Because if I don't give you a heads up and you were in the meeting and I just ask you afterwards, how did I do? You're going to say, oh, you did fine, Cole, which is not very useful. Versus if I tell you, David, I've been really struggling, particularly in podcasts, with the filler word so, where I like to end sentences or right, excuse me, not so. I either start with so or I end with right, or do both of those things. And so I would like you to listen for that and let me know if you think I overuse those filler words. Right? That gives you something really specific to say, because then you can be like, I was counting and you actually ended a sentence with right 15 times. That seems a little excessive, Cole. Because it gives me better feedback, but it also grants you permission to be direct with it in ways that can be useful. So I'm a big fan of identify somebody to give you feedback ahead of time and let them know ahead of time what to be watching out for. And they'll be your cheerleaders when you're there at the meeting or at the presentation. And so that can also be a friendly face in the audience that can be useful from a confidence building standpoint as well. So identify someone ahead of time, be clear on what you want feedback on, follow up with them afterwards, and then do it all again from there.
Actually, you just reminded me of something from your speech at P-Analytics World in London last year. Filler words, and you gave examples of them, and I was like, oh yeah, I used that one this morning, use that one this morning. It's so easy to use those filler words because you almost, I don't know, you're moving to the next point, so you just use some of those words. So right, and there's plenty of them, aren't there?
Well, and it's like clutter in a graph, where a little bit here and there is not going to be the end of the world. The problem is when there's too much of it, it can get in the way of our message. It can chip away at credibility or make us sound uncertain. So that's one of the big reasons to record oneself, both to become aware of which filler words you're using, but then also when you are using them so that you can decide what to do instead. Most often, the what to do instead is simply
pause. Yeah.
Pause.
Yeah. The power of pause is actually quite powerful. It can be, can't it? So,
it is.
So, Cole, obviously the book is structured around 3 areas around plan, create, and deliver. So give listeners one insight to take away for each of those 3 steps: plan, create, deliver. I know you've done some of that already, but just all together now in here. Yeah. That's a filler word.
Absolutely. So I would say when it comes to plan, we've talked about audience a lot already, so I won't rehash that. When it comes to plan, think about your story and how you want to start, what the middle part is going to be that will pique and maintain people's attention, and then how you're going to end that for your audience, having them be really clear on what the action you want them to take is. When it comes to creating, I'll emphasize something that we touched on before, which is that your slide, your graph, never should that be the center of the show. These are your useful assistant. They're there to help you, but you as the presenter really are where the communication is going to fail or succeed. And so that brings me to the final section on deliver. And I will say, plan strategies ahead of time that are going to build your confidence, that are going to help you feel prepared. But when you get there, when you're doing the thing, the meeting or the presentation, you got to let that go a bit, right? That foundation should be there. You've internalized it, but then you really want to be in the moment and observing and both enjoying what's happening, but also reacting to what you're seeing in terms of the facial expressions of your audience. If you see furrowed brows, you want to decide, well, do I dig into that? Do I ask questions, or do I slow down and explain something in another way? So you can be really in the moment and use what you learn in the moment to make that a fantastic communication situation, both for yourself as well as for everyone else.
Cole, wonderful insights as ever. So before we get to the question of the series, I know our listeners would have found this conversation helpful, the insights that you've given. But because I know you're always working on something new, I think you've actually sketched out in the front of the book that it was a kind of 6-year journey, actually, or 4 or 5 year journey to actually publish this book, even though it was your third.
That one took a while.
What are you working on now? Is there anything we should keep our eyes open for?
There is. Here, I'll hold up an early copy for those who are watching, which is something that I have printed and glued together. But it features a data drawing dragon named Daphne, who is going to help me teach the 6 to 9-year-old population the beauty of graphs for problem solving. And so a much younger audience this time, but colorful and fun. Daphne Draws Data is available to pre-order across all booksellers now and will be available in print in September 2024.
Fantastic. Well, I take my kids are 15 and 13. I think my 13-year-old could probably do with that, actually. So I'll make sure I'll get a copy for her as well. Cole, now the question of the series. So this is something we're asking everyone on this series of the Digital HR Leaders podcast. And I think you'll bring a unique angle to this one. How can HR leaders harness the power of employee insights and analytics to revolutionize the workplace experience? And that's quite a big question. I know.
Revolutionize the workplace experience. No small question.
No small question here to finish. No.
That's a great one. I think encouraging HR professionals to adopt a data-driven mindset, which is maybe not something that historically has been emphasized and maybe even historically has been shied away from. But that means investing in themselves, getting the right tools and technologies, maybe even attending a storytelling with data workshop, and really fostering a culture of openness and continuous feedback. And I'll stress not just the importance of the collection of the data, but also actively listening to it and acting upon it to create a workplace where employees feel empowered, engaged, and valued, and do all of this while leveraging the power of story.
The power of story. Storytelling is powerful. As human beings, we've been telling stories for thousands of years, and we will be telling stories in thousands of years' time. Even if we're using technology to help us to do it, we're still telling stories ultimately.
Yes.
Cole, it's always a pleasure. Thank you very much for being a guest on the Digital HR Leaders podcast again. Please can you let listeners know how they can find out more about you, follow you on social media, and find out more about storytelling with data, and maybe book you or one of your team for a workshop?
Yes. Thank you for the invite, David. It's been a pleasure as always. Folks can find many more resources at storytellingwithdata.com. I am at storywithdata on Twitter. We also have a Storytelling with Data page on LinkedIn where we post tips and tricks and links to all of our good stuff daily. So I encourage folks to check that out as well.
Fantastic. And I think I'll see you in London in a few weeks as well at People Analytics World in the third week of April, I think it is, isn't it? But
yeah, it's going to come fast.
Fantastic. Cole, thank you so much. Take care, and look forward to seeing you and Randy in London in a few weeks' time. In this series, we will be speaking to a range of senior leaders who are pushing a data-driven and digital HR agenda. Make sure that you subscribe via your podcast app of choice and also via our YouTube channel for free and regular interviews with the digital HR leaders of the future.